They found him face down in his eggs and bacon. No struggle, no scream, just silence, and Ruth Holloway standing over him with a cup of coffee and a smile. The morning sun had just cracked through the lace curtains of a small farmhouse in rural Kentucky. Sheriff Daniels got the call at 7:42 a.m. "Another one's gone," the voice said. He didn't even need to ask the name. In this town, there was only one woman known for burying her husbands faster than anyone could count: Ruth Holloway. She sat at the kitchen table when the deputies arrived, hair pinned up, apron spotless. Her eighth husband, Harold, lay cold beside his breakfast plate. His skin was grey, his lips pale, and on the corner of the table sat a small brown bottle, no label. "Morning, Sheriff," Ruth said softly. Her voice carried that southern warmth that could melt butter. But her eyes, they were something else. Still, calm, empty. The coroner called it suspicious circumstances. The sheriff called it the same damn story again. Because Harold wasn't the first. He was the eighth. Neighbors gathered outside the fence, whispering like church mice. "She's cursed," one said. "No," another muttered. "She's the curse." The reporters came before lunch. The story spread like fire. 8 husbands, 8 funerals. All natural deaths, they said. All accidents. All with Ruth's name on the insurance papers. Inside the house, Ruth made herself another cup of coffee. Not a tremble. Not a tear. Just that faint smile again. The same one she wore at every burial. Sheriff Daniels had known Ruth for years. He'd seen her cry at her first husband's funeral back in 1949. Real tears. Or so he thought. She'd been young then, barely 22. A beauty with red curls and a soft southern drawl. Men fell for her faster than flies on honey. And one by one, they all died trying to love her. Now, standing in her kitchen, Daniels felt something cold crawl down his spine. He'd seen evil before, but this was different. This was polite evil, the kind that smiled while it poisoned you. "Ruth," he said quietly, "we're going to need to take you in for questioning." She didn't argue, didn't even blink. She just nodded and set her cup down gently. "I understand, Sheriff," she said. Then she slipped on her coat, straightened her collar, and followed them outside like she'd been waiting for this moment all along. The cameras flashed. She waved to the crowd. Like a movie star being led to the car, not a widow suspected of 8 deaths. Her calmness frightened everyone. At the station, detectives started digging. Each marriage certificate, each death report, each payout. The pattern was undeniable. 8 husbands in 26 years. All died of mysterious illnesses. All buried fast. All insured. But the proof, and that was the problem. Poison leaves traces, but time erases them. And Ruth knew how to use time. "Tell me, Mrs. Holloway," the detective asked, "what happened this morning?" Ruth looked up, lips curling into something between a smile and a secret. "He wasn't feeling well," she said softly. "I made him breakfast. Then he stopped breathing." Simple, clean, rehearsed. The detective stared at her for a long moment. Then he asked, "Do you know how all 8 of your husbands ended up dead?" She tilted her head. "Bad luck, I suppose. Bad luck." That's what they called it in the newspapers the next day. The widow's bad luck. But some said she made her own luck, one drop at a time. Sheriff Daniels didn't believe in luck anymore. He believed in patterns, and Ruth's pattern was death. He leaned back in his chair and whispered to himself, "She kills for comfort, not rage." He'd seen her eyes. No anger, no jealousy, just calculation. That night the coroner confirmed what everyone feared. Traces of arsenic, just enough to look like a heart attack, just enough to fool a doctor, but not enough to fool time. Ruth sat in her cell, humming softly. A tune from her wedding day, they said. When the sheriff passed her cell, she smiled again. "Am I free to go, Sheriff?" "Not this time," he replied. She just laughed quietly. "Then I guess you'll have to prove it." Outside, the town buzzed with fear and fascination. 8 men gone, 8 life insurance checks. 1 woman, still breathing, but something about Ruth Holloway wasn't done yet. Behind those soft eyes was a secret darker than arsenic. And the story of her first husband, the one that started it all, was about to come crawling back from the grave, because every widow has a beginning. And Ruth's beginning was blood. If you think Ruth Holloway was born evil or made that way by the men she buried, comment your thoughts below. Share this story with someone who loves true crime. And don't forget to like, share and subscribe, because we'll show you how her first husband's accident wasn't an accident at all. They said her first husband died in a hunting accident, but the only thing Ruth Holloway ever hunted was men. The year was 1949. Alabama heat pressed down like a curse. Flies buzzed around the churchyard, where a young widow in a black dress wiped a single tear from her cheek. Her name was Ruth Ann Holloway, and her first husband, Thomas Reed, was being lowered into the ground. People whispered behind their handkerchiefs. Poor girl, they said. Barely 22 and already a widow, but not everyone pitied her. Old Mrs. Givens, who lived across the street from the Reeds, told a different story. She swore she saw Ruth walking back from the woods that morning, spotless dress, calm face, no grief in her eyes. And Thomas? He was found an hour later, face down near the creek, gun beside him. They called it an accident. The sheriff shook his head, wrote his report, and closed the file. But Mrs. Givens never forgot that look on Ruth's face. Not sadness, satisfaction. Ruth met Thomas 2 years earlier at the Sunday picnic. He was a shy mechanic, honest, kind, and easy to love. Ruth was light itself. Red curls, soft laughter, the kind of woman who made men straighten their shirts just by walking by. Thomas proposed under the magnolia tree behind her mother's house. Everyone said they'd make a perfect couple, but perfection doesn't last. Within a year, Thomas started coughing at night. Doctors said it was just bad lungs. Then he got dizzy spells, then the shakes. And one morning, after breakfast, he stumbled into the woods with his shotgun and never came back. The doctor listed the cause as accidental gun discharge. The town moved on. Ruth didn't. She collected the insurance money, $5,000, a small fortune back then, and left town quietly. No family, no friends, no goodbye. Just gone. 2 towns over, she reappeared under a new name, Ruth Reed Holloway. A fresh start, she told people. But her heart hadn't changed, only her address. She took a job as a waitress at Miller's Diner, smiling her way through the smoke and grease. That's where she met Harlan Holloway, a traveling salesman with a gold watch and a weakness for pretty faces. He was older, richer, and desperate for company. Ruth gave him warmth. He gave her a ring. They married in less than 6 months. It was quick, quiet, almost too quiet. Her smile at the altar was soft, practiced, like she'd done this before. Maybe she had. Harlan built her a little house on the edge of town. New furniture, new clothes. She had everything she wanted, except patience. He started complaining about stomach pains after dinner one night. The doctor thought it was bad cooking, then ulcers, then stress. But no medicine helped. When he finally collapsed at the breakfast table, Ruth didn't scream, didn't cry. She simply dialed the doctor, voice steady. "He's not breathing," she said, and by the time help arrived, Harlan Holloway was already cold. Cause of death, heart failure. But the coroner made a note in the margin, unusual odor around the mouth. No one followed up. Ruth was a widow again. 2 years. 2 funerals. 2 insurance checks. By now, she'd learned how to play her role perfectly. The mourning veil, the quiver in her voice, the delicate sobs at the casket. Every gesture rehearsed, every tear well-timed. The local pastor said she was cursed by love itself. The undertaker said she was born for black dresses. And the men in town, they still couldn't stay away. She met her 3rd husband, Eddie Burns, at a church supper. He was young, charming, and foolish, thought he could fix her broken heart. Ruth smiled, touched his hand, and whispered, "You're too good for me." That was all it took. Eddie never looked at another woman again. Their courtship was quick and strange. He bought her flowers. She bought him a new suit. He built her a porch swing. She built him a coffin. Within a year, Eddie started feeling dizzy, weak, and pale. Doctor said exhaustion. Ruth said worry. He said he was just lucky to have her. 3 weeks later, Eddie's body was found slumped beside his truck. Heart stopped. Age 28. No autopsy. Just another tragedy for poor Ruth. But behind the sympathy, whispers began again. 3 husbands, 3 graves, 1 woman still standing. People in town avoided her now. Not openly, just subtle things. Crossing the street when she passed. Lowering their voices when she entered the store. Even the preacher stopped visiting her porch. Ruth didn't mind. Solitude suited her. She liked the quiet. It made her planning easier. Because while the world saw a grieving widow, Ruth saw opportunity. Each death gave her more confidence. Each funeral taught her how to perfect the illusion. And by the time she moved to Kentucky in 1955, she'd mastered it. That's where she met George Holloway, a farmer with kind eyes and a soft heart. She told him she'd lost everything. He told her he'd protect her. 6 months later, he was gone too. Another illness, another payout, another new town. By now, the local newspapers had started to notice. One journalist even wrote a headline, "The Widow Who Never Weeps." It was a small story buried on page 7. No one connected the dot, not yet, but someone did remember. An old woman from Alabama, Mrs. Givens, saw that headline years later while visiting her niece in Kentucky. The face in the photo was older, sharper, but unmistakable. She wrote to the sheriff in Alabama, "This woman buried my neighbor's boy." Said it was an accident. Don't believe her. That letter would later land on Sheriff Daniel's desk, the same man who stood in Ruth's kitchen decades later, staring at husband number 8. But in 1955, Ruth was still untouchable. She'd built a life on lies and poison, and no one could see the stains. Every grave was another page in her story. Every tear another disguise, and in her diary, found years later by investigators, she wrote one single line under the date of each death. "He loved me too much." The next chapter of Ruth Holloway's life would be darker, bloodier and bolder, because after 3 clean kills, she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was hunting, and husband number 4 would never see her coming. If you think Ruth's first murders were accidents or practice, tell me what you believe in the comments. Do you think evil can be learned, or was she born with it? Make sure to like, share, and subscribe, because we'll show you how her charm turned into a weapon, and how the first detective who crossed her nearly became victim number 9. By the time Ruth Holloway buried her 4th husband, people stopped sending flowers. They just sent questions and fear. It was 1958 when Ruth moved again. A new town, a new name, a new man. She told her neighbors she'd lost her husband in a farming accident, left out that she'd lost 3 more before him. The town was quiet, small, and gullible. The kind of place where everyone waved and nobody asked too many questions. Perfect for a woman like Ruth, she met Frank Dawson at a Sunday market. He was a big man with a kind heart and a laugh that filled the air. He sold tools. She sold baked goods. Their first conversation was about a pie. Their second was about marriage. 3 months later, they were husband and wife. Frank thought he'd found heaven. Ruth thought she'd found her next paycheck. At first, everything looked normal. She cooked his meals, ironed his shirts, sang while cleaning the porch. But then, like always, things started to change. Frank began feeling tired, then sick, then scared. He told the local doctor that his food tasted strange, metallic. The doctor blamed nerves. But Frank's nerves didn't kill him. Ruth did. One night he didn't wake up. The doctor called it pneumonia. Ruth called it God's will. The insurance company called it a tragedy. And once again, Ruth packed up, collected the check, and disappeared. By now, Ruth had a pattern. Move to a new town. Find a man. Charm him. Kill him, collect, repeat. It was mechanical, efficient, almost professional. But her next target, Walter Hayes, wasn't like the others. He was sharp, suspicious, and dangerous in his own way. Walter ran a small hardware store in Tennessee. Widowed once, smart, cautious with money. He liked Ruth's confidence, but something in her smile bothered him. Still, charm is a weapon, and Ruth wielded it like a blade. She made him feel young again, needed, wanted. He fell hard, fast, and stupid. They married in spring 1961. By winter, Walter was gone. Heart failure, they said, natural causes. But the coroner, Dr. Briggs, didn't buy it. Something about Walter's body bothered him. His organs were pale, his blood thin, his tongue blackened. Classic signs of arsenic. Briggs sent a quiet report to the county police. They didn't act on it. No proof, no witness. And Ruth, already gone before the ink dried. She left Tennessee under a new name, Mrs. Ruth Harper, and reappeared in Missouri with another ring on her finger. Husband number 6, Charles Harper, a retired banker. Charles adored her, spoiled her, defended her when people gossiped. He even rewrote his will for her. That was his last mistake. When he collapsed in the garden one morning, the gardener swore he saw Ruth standing over him, motionless. No scream, no panic. Just waiting. The coroner said heart failure again. Ruth wore black again. The neighbors whispered again. But this time, someone was listening. Detective Harold Marlowe was reviewing old insurance claims for a fraud case when he stumbled on her file. 6 husbands, 8 policies, all connected by one name, Ruth Holloway. Sometimes Reed, sometimes Dawson, sometimes Harper, but always the same signature. He felt a chill reading through it. The handwriting neat, the statements rehearsed, the timing perfect. He pulled old death certificates from 3 states. And there it was, the same doctor's handwriting in 2 of them. A doctor who had since retired, living quietly in Florida. Marlowe made a call. 2 weeks later, he was on a plane. The doctor remembered her immediately. "Oh yes, Mrs. Holloway," he said. "Charming woman. Lost so many husbands, poor thing. Did you ever suspect anything?" Marlowe asked. The old man hesitated. "Once," he whispered. "Her 3rd husband. I thought I smelled almonds. But the lab couldn't confirm poison back then." Marlowe felt his stomach twist. Cyanide, the faint smell of almonds. This wasn't coincidence. This was a method. He went back through her trail. Alabama, Kentucky, Tennessee, Missouri. Everywhere she went, men died. And the payout followed. He tracked her last known address, Kansas City, 1966. By then, Ruth had married again. Husband number 7, Albert Crane, a war veteran with steady hands and failing lungs. She played nurse, doting wife, perfect angel. He told friends he'd finally found peace. 6 months later, he was dead. When Marlowe arrived, the funeral was already over. Ruth was already packing her bags. He introduced himself politely. "Detective Marlowe, ma'am. Mind if I ask you a few questions?" She smiled, pouring tea. "Of course not, detective." "You must be tired from your travels." Her voice was sugar. Her eyes were knives. He noticed her hands didn't shake. "Not grief, not guilt, not even curiosity. Seems like you've had a lot of bad luck," he said quietly. "Some women just attract tragedy." Ruth smiled wider. "Or maybe men attract it themselves," she said. For a moment the air between them froze. Marlowe knew she was dangerous. But he couldn't arrest her, not yet. He needed proof, so he watched her, waited, followed her. Weeks passed. Then one night she bought something strange from a pharmacy, rat poison. The clerk didn't think much of it. But Marlowe did. He noted it down. A month later, her 8th husband was dead. The pattern complete. Marlowe arrived at the farmhouse the next morning, long before the news broke. He stood by the fence, staring at the ambulance. Sheriff Daniels was already there. Same weary face, same haunted eyes. "You too, huh?" Daniels said quietly. 8 husbands. "I'm starting to think the devil keeps her warm." Marlowe lit a cigarette. "No," he said. "She keeps herself warm." That was the morning Ruth was finally arrested. But even in cuffs, she smiled like she was the one in control. Later, in her interrogation, Marlowe placed all 8 photos in front of her. 8 men, 8 smiles, 8 graves. He leaned close. "Tell me, Ruth, why them?" She stared at the pictures, her lips barely moving. "They were all the same," she whispered. "Men who wanted to own me. Men who thought love meant control." She looked up, her voice suddenly cold. "So I set myself free." Marlowe felt his blood run cold. No remorse, no humanity, just logic, twisted but pure. He realized then that Ruth Holloway didn't kill for money. She killed for power, for the thrill of being untouchable. And as the clock ticked behind her, she leaned back, eyes glinting under the harsh light. "You can't prove it," she said. And for a while she was right, but time was turning against her. A secret buried years ago, one from her very first husband, was about to resurface. A body exhumed, a bottle found, and the truth that would finally break the legend of the killer widow, because even the cleverest monster leaves a footprint. And Ruth Holloway's footprints led straight back to her first grave. If you think Detective Marlowe should have arrested her sooner, tell me below. Was Ruth driven by hate, greed, or something darker? Comment your theory. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because we'll reveal how Ruth's perfect lies began to crack when the dead finally started talking back. They dug up her first husband's grave after 20 years, and what they found in his bones finally screamed the truth. Ruth Holloway thought she'd buried forever. The year was 1970. The summer was hot and cruel. And for the first time, Ruth Holloway wasn't the one in control. She sat in a cold cell, hands folded neatly in her lap. Across the table, Detective Harold Marlowe, a man who had spent 5 years chasing her shadow through 4 states and 8 graves. He placed a folder on the table. Thick, heavy, marked Reed. Thomas, deceased 1949. Ruth's eyes flicked toward it just once, just long enough to betray the smallest spark of fear. You remember Thomas Reed? Marlowe asked quietly. Her first husband, her first victim, her first mistake. Ruth's voice came out soft. I was a girl then, Detective. A wife who lost her husband in a terrible accident. Marlowe leaned forward. Funny thing about accidents, Ruth. They don't usually leave traces of arsenic in the bones. For the first time in years, she didn't smile. It had started months earlier when Sheriff Daniels received a letter from Alabama. A retired coroner had come forward. He'd been haunted by an old case. A young man found dead by the creek in 1949. No autopsy. No suspicion. Just a closed file and a pretty widow who disappeared the next week. But now, new forensic tools could detect what old ones couldn't. So they exhumed the body of Thomas Reed, and what they found under that cracked headstone changed everything. Arsenic. Enough to kill 10 men. The news hit like thunder. Black Widow of the South, the headline screamed. 8 husbands, 8 deaths. One truth. Ruth Holloway, the grieving widow, was now the most notorious killer in America. Reporters crowded outside the courthouse. Women clutched their pearls. Men whispered prayers, and Ruth, she walked into the courtroom like she was arriving at a Sunday sermon. Head high, dress pressed, no handcuffs. Her attorney called her a victim of cruel coincidence. The prosecution called her a pattern in human form. But when the coroner from Alabama took the stand and described the arsenic traces found in her first husband's remains, the courtroom fell. Silent, Marlowe watched her face the whole time. Not a blink, not a twitch, just a faint smile like she already knew the outcome. Then came the testimonies. The pharmacist who remembered selling her rat poison twice. The gardener who saw her standing over Charles Harper's body. The nurse who treated Walter Hayes and smelled almonds on his breath. Piece by piece, her world began to crack, but the final blow came from an unexpected place, her own diary. The police had found it tucked beneath a false panel in her dresser. Worn leather, smudged ink, 8 years of careful notes. No confessions, just fragments, dates, amounts. And beneath each husband's name, the same line written in elegant cursive, "He stopped loving me." When the prosecutor read those words aloud, the courtroom gasped. Ruth didn't flinch. She just turned her head and whispered, "Wouldn't you?" Marlowe stared at her in disbelief. "Why, Ruth?" he asked. Her voice was calm. "They promised forever. I just helped them keep it." As the trial went on, people from every town she'd lived in came to testify. A waitress from Tennessee who remembered her carrying a small brown bottle. A preacher from Kentucky who said she'd confessed, not sins but satisfaction. Even her old neighbor, Mrs. Givens, now frail and trembling, took the stand. She smiled that morning, the old woman said, tears rolling down her cheeks. The day her first husband died, she smiled. The courtroom froze. That smile had followed Ruth across 20 years and 8 graves. It was the smile of a woman who thought she'd never be caught. On the last day of the trial, Ruth took the stand herself. The crowd leaned in. The reporters lifted their pens. And for the first time, Ruth Holloway spoke her truth. "They were all kind men," she began. Each one thought he could fix me. Love me, own me. But love, she said, her voice like silk over glass, isn't ownership. It's surrender. And I don't surrender. She turned toward the jury, eyes sharp as blades. They died because they loved me, and I simply didn't love them back. Gasps rippled through the room. Even her lawyer buried his face in his hands. Marlowe felt a chill crawl through his chest. He'd heard killers justify their crimes before, but never like this. Never with such peace. The jury took just 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. Life in prison. When the verdict was read, Ruth smiled again. Not the soft widow's smile, not the gentle southern charm, but the smile of a queen whose crown couldn't be taken, even behind bars. She spent the next 2 decades at Coldwater Women's Penitentiary. Never confessed, never cried, never asked for forgiveness. They said she kept a small mirror in her cell, polished every day. She'd stare at her reflection for hours, humming softly. When asked what she was thinking, she replied, "I just like to see what power looks like." In her final years, she became a legend. Reporters called her the killer widow. Psychologists called her emotionless, elegant evil. But the guards called her ma'am. Even they were afraid to look her in the eye. When she died in her sleep at age 72, the nurse said her lips were curved in a faint smile, the same one that haunted every man she ever touched. Detective Marlowe stood at her grave years later. No flowers, no mourners, just a stone that read Ruth Holloway, 1927 to 1999. Beloved wife, he muttered under his breath, 8 times, a maybe. Then turned and walked away. Because Ruth Holloway didn't just kill her husbands, she killed the idea of love itself. And in the echo of her story, one truth remains: some monsters wear blood on their hands. Others wear it on their smiles. If you believe Ruth Holloway was born a killer or shaped by the men she buried, tell me what you think in the comments. Do you believe love can turn deadly? Make sure to like, share, and subscribe, because more true stories like this are coming soon. And next time, the killer might be closer than you think. The courtroom was silent. Not a whisper, not a cough. Just the sound of Ruth Holloway's heels clicking as she entered. The killer widow, that's what the newspapers called her now. 8 husbands, 8 deaths, and a town hungry for answers. She didn't look like a killer. Her gray hair was neatly pinned. Her dress was modest. Her eyes calm as still water. But beneath that calm, something twisted lurked. The jury stared at her like she was a ghost. The prosecutor, a young man named Henry Cole, cleared his throat. He'd spent months gathering evidence, insurance records, letters, poison traces, even the wedding photos that told the story of her smile aging but never changing. Every husband had the same grin beside her, and everyone ended in a grave. Henry took a deep breath and began, "Ladies and gentlemen, what you see before you is not bad luck. It's calculation." Ruth Holloway didn't love her husbands. She harvested them. Ruth tilted her head, her lips curved. That same faint, knowing smile, he held up a small glass vial. Inside, pale white residue. This, he said, was found in her kitchen cabinet. Arsenic, the same poison found in all 8 men. The same poison that killed Harold Holloway, her last. The room gasped. Even the judge shifted uneasily, but Ruth didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned forward, eyes glinting like sharp glass. "Mr. Cole," she said softly, "have you ever lost someone you love?" The prosecutor hesitated. "I have," she continued. "Then you know. Sometimes love just dies. People die. That's life." Her voice floated through the courtroom, calm and chilling. People leaned closer without realizing it. That was her gift. She made you listen even when you knew you shouldn't. Henry gathered himself. 8 deaths aren't coincidence, Mrs. Holloway. Ruth smiled again. "Then maybe I'm cursed." The judge banged his gavel. "Mrs. Holloway, you'll speak only when addressed." But her smirk said she already controlled the room. As the trial dragged on, the stories came one by one. A farmer who drank tea and never woke up. A salesman who collapsed in his sleep. A war veteran whose whiskey turned bitter hours before his heart gave out. And always, Ruth nearby with tears that dried too fast. Then came the letters. hidden in her dresser, discovered during a search. Each one written to an insurance agent requesting a new beneficiary update, always a few months before each death. The dates lined up perfectly. The motive was clear, but one letter stood out, addressed not to an insurance man, but to someone named E. The handwriting wavered, softer, almost affectionate. And the words, "You were right. They all fall so easily. I'll be free soon. Yours are." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Who was E? A lover, an accomplice, a ghost from her past. The prosecutor smiled grimly. "Ladies and gentlemen, we found the original envelope, postmarked from a small town in Georgia, the same town where her first husband Thomas died 30 years ago." Ruth's mask slipped, just for a second. Her jaw tightened. Her fingers gripped the edge of the table. Then, as if remembering herself, she smiled again. Henry leaned forward. "Who is E, Mrs. Holloway?" She didn't answer. "Was he the man who helped you start all this?" Silence. "Was he the one who taught you how to kill?" The crowd gasped. Ruth's eyes finally met his, cold, unblinking. Then she said something no one expected. "He taught me how to survive." The judge called for order, but the words hung heavy, like a curse. When court adjourned that night, Ruth was escorted back to her cell. As she passed the reporters, she whispered, "I did what I had to do." No one understood what that meant. Not yet. That night, Sheriff Daniels visited her again. The same man who'd arrested her. The same man who'd seen the bodies. "Who's he?" he asked quietly. Ruth chuckled. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you. Try me." She leaned closer, her voice low. "He was the first. The only one I didn't bury." Daniels froze. "You mean—" "Yes," she said. "Thomas, her first husband. The one she'd been accused of killing in 1949. He never died." Daniels stared in disbelief. She smiled wider. "He taught me everything. How to mix, how to measure, how to make it look natural. He faked his death, and I finished his work." For a long moment, the sheriff just stood there. Then he whispered, "You expect me to believe your dead husband is still alive?" Ruth's eyes gleamed. "He'll come for me. You'll see." The next morning, news broke that a man fitting Thomas Holloway's description had been seen near the courthouse. Older, frail, but unmistakable. Security was tightened. Everyone thought Ruth had lied, until they checked the courthouse cameras. At 2:13 a.m., a shadowy figure had appeared at the cell block door. A man with gray hair. He whispered something through the bars to Ruth, then vanished. No one could explain it. No one could find him. And when Sheriff Daniels returned to her cell, Ruth was gone. The door still locked. No signs of escape, only a folded note on the bed, written in the same shaky hand as before. 8 wasn't enough. He's waiting. They searched every corner of Kentucky, Georgia, and Tennessee. No trace, no body, just her story, spreading like wildfire. Some say Ruth Holloway escaped that night and reunited with Thomas. Some say she died and never left that cell at all. But others whispered that the curse she spoke of wasn't a lie, because a year later, one of the jurors who convicted her was found dead in his kitchen. Poisoned coffee. Cup still warm. If you believe Ruth Holloway escaped, or if you think the curse was real, comment your theory below. Share this story with every true crime lover you know. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because next we'll uncover what really happened to Thomas Holloway, the man who taught the killer widow how to kill. They said he'd been dead since 1949. They buried him. They cried for him. And then, 30 years later, someone saw him walking out of a gas station in Georgia. Alive, Thomas Holloway. The man who started everything. The man who taught Ruth how to kill. The sighting came from a truck driver named Dale Kinsey. He was heading north toward Lexington when he stopped for gas outside a small diner. Old man at the counter, gray hair, thick glasses, quiet. Didn't look up much. But when the TV news played a headline about the killer widow escapes custody, the man whispered under his breath, she wasn't supposed to get caught. Dale froze. He recognized the face, not from real life, but from the newspaper photos of Ruth's first husband, Thomas Holloway. Same jawline, same eyes. Older, yes, but unmistakable. By the time Dale called the police, the man was gone. Left a half-finished cup of black coffee and a $10 bill on the counter. Sheriff Daniels got the report that night. He read it twice, then drove 4 hours to that same diner himself. Something about it felt wrong. Too coincidental. The waitress remembered him too. Polite, soft-spoken, called himself Mr. Harlow, paid cash. Slept in a truck behind the diner sometimes. Disappeared 2 nights ago. Same time Ruth vanished. The sheriff's hands began to shake. If it was Thomas, then everything Ruth said was true. He ordered a search of old county records, grave exhumation orders, autopsy photos, and there it was, a name that didn't belong. Thomas's death certificate, signed by a coroner who'd been dead 3 years before the date listed. A fake. The original file had been altered. Someone wanted Thomas Holloway legally dead. The sheriff called the state office, but the clerk hesitated. "We've had someone else asking for that same record," she said. "Who?" He didn't give a name, just said his wife would want it. That's when Daniels knew Thomas and Ruth were working together again, and whatever they started back in 1949 wasn't finished. 2 weeks later, midnight, a farmhouse burned to the ground near the Kentucky border. Inside, 2 charred bodies, man and woman, no IDs. But on the kitchen table, just outside the fire's reach, sat a letter, the paper edges singed. The handwriting familiar. "Dear Sheriff Daniels, you were right. 8 wasn't enough. Neither of us was meant for ordinary life. We found each other again. We made peace our way. Tell them we're gone for good this time." R&T, the sheriff stared at the letter for hours, but something gnawed at him. The bodies were too small, too burnt to confirm. No dental match, no DNA record, only a wedding ring on one hand, inscribed R+T 1949. Reporters called it the final chapter. The town breathed again, but Daniels couldn't, because 3 nights later he got another letter. No stamp, no address. Slipped under his office door. "Daniels, you're chasing ghosts." "Don't." His hands trembled. The ink was fresh. The paper smelled faintly of lavender, Ruth's perfume. He called the FBI. They searched every abandoned property linked to the Holloways. But each place told the same story. A cup of coffee left half full, a newspaper folded to the crime section, and always, always the smell of arsenic in the air. Months passed. The town of Hollow Creek tried to move on. New families moved in. Old ones tried to forget. But some nights, people swore they saw her. A woman in a long grey dress walking by the cemetery gates, humming softly, like she was waiting for someone. And sometimes a man followed a few steps behind her, tall, grey-haired, carrying a single red rose. One night, a local journalist named Claire Benton decided to investigate. She'd read all the files, studied every photo. She wanted to be the one who proved the Holloways were still alive. She set up a camera near the cemetery just after midnight. Cold wind, moonlight sharp as glass. And then, movement. 2 figures at the edge of the field. Claire zoomed in. It was them, Ruth and Thomas, holding hands, staring at the rows of graves that bore the names of 8 dead men. She whispered into her mic, "My God, they're real." Then her camera flickered, static. 1 second they were there, the next gone. The only thing left on the recording was a single voice whispering close to the mic. "Some love never dies." The next morning, Claire Benton didn't show up for work. Her car was found near the cemetery gate. Door open, engine running, camera gone. All they found was a folded napkin on the driver's seat, written in that same looping cursive. "You shouldn't have followed us." The legend of Ruth and Thomas Holloway grew after that. Some called them killers, others soulmates. A dark love story carved in poison and ash. But every few years, a new case would surface, a husband dead, a wife missing, or a note left behind with 2 initials at the bottom. R&T Sheriff Daniels, retired with a folder he never closed. On his last day, he left it on his desk for the next man in charge. Inside was a single page, handwritten by him. They say Ruth Holloway died in fire. But I don't believe in ashes. I believe in ghosts that walk and love that kills. And below that, he'd written just one last line. "If you ever get a letter that smells like lavender, run." Do you think Ruth and Thomas really died in that fire? Or are they still out there, living under new names, killing for love? Comment your theory below. And don't forget to like, share and subscribe, because in the next part, we'll uncover the hidden Holloway diary, the chilling pages Ruth wrote before she vanished.